Alright, hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today, November 21st, 2014, marks the 10th anniversary of the release and launch of the original Nintendo DS in North America, which, believe it or not, was one of the rare occurrences where it launched in North America before it launched in Japan. So it was kind of a big deal coming out here first because we didn't have that sort of like anticipation of seeing a console release in Japan and seeing all the people playing the games and hearing the feedback and reading about it in magazines. It was sort of like launched here first, so we got the first-hand experience. But basically what I figured I would do is go over my experience with the launch of the DS and sort of like how optimistic I kind of was, as many people were, whether or not the system would even be successful or any good, because I'm sure a lot of you remember the launch games for the DS were pretty bad. And I'd actually go on record as saying that the games that launched for the original DS, it was probably one of the worst launch lineups in the history of gaming, except for one saving grace, which I'll get to in a moment here. But I figured I'd use this video to sort of go over my experience with the DS in its first year of release, going over the launch titles, titles that followed soon after, and titles that came out later in 2005 that sort of rectified and rejuvenated people's hopes in the DS as an actual viable gaming console. And I'm sure we all know how successful the DS ended up being, so it's kind of interesting to take a look back, how it started, its sort of weak start, in terms of people like actually trusting Nintendo with this thing, because it was a really weird concept. I mean, two screens, right? It had been, I don't know, it was just really odd to think, how are the two screens going to be used? Most people, which was sort of proven in a lot of the earlier titles, it was just used for like a bottom map screen or just simple touch controls for like menus and stuff like that. It wasn't until years later where games started really taking control of what you can do with the two screens and the touchscreen. So what do you say we get started with the launch itself? Me, of course, I was at a launch release for this. I went to Best Buy, and I can't remember exactly how early I lined up, but I would say it was definitely a few hours. I'd say I was out there for at least 6 to 8 hours out in the freezing cold. It was late November. It was getting pretty cold out. People were excited. All the Nintendo fans are always excited for new console releases, and this was a big step forward because you see the videos and stuff of Super Mario DS, and you're like, oh my god, I'm going to be able to play one of the best games of all time on a handheld, and the graphics at the time, well, I'll just show you here, kind of blew me away for Super Mario DS, as they did for a lot of people. Because prior to this, I mean, we really didn't have any games that look this amazing in handheld form. Like, this was the pinnacle, this was the best looking game that you can really play on handhelds at the time. So, the system launched, and feedback was not that great because, well, out of the launch titles, these are the ones that I own. Super Mario DS, Asphalt Racing, Spider-Man 2, and The Urbs, which I never even played. I think I picked this up years later. But yeah, this was a launch game. Supposedly not that great. But the games that launched didn't really use the touchscreen at all. Super Mario DS had to use it, where you either had to use like the D-pad to move around, or you can use the touchscreen with. Remember that little? I sold my original DS, unfortunately, so I don't have this anymore. But there was a strap that came with the original DS, and it had this little thing on the end, like a little nub, where you can actually put it on the touchscreen and sort of like move your thumb around stationary like this, and it actually acted as a joystick. That actually made playing this game sort of doable. It wasn't the most ideal way to do it. But I always missed that little thumb strap. I should really try and get one again. But other than that, I mean, the dual screen really wasn't used for anything. I remember like Ridge Racer DS had like a steering wheel on the bottom, so you can use your finger or the stylus to kind of like go back and forth to steer the game, which was apparently a really bad way to play that game. But it really gave people the wrong impression of the system. And, it wasn't helped by a very poor launch lineup. I mean, Asphalt Urban GT. Actually, the only game I bought with the system at first was Mario, and then I got these games like a week or two later, towards the holidays. Asphalt was just a pretty average racing game. It was kind of fun. It was exciting because, hey, it's a new racing game that looks pretty damn good on this new system. And Spider-Man 2, I'm sure if I played it now, it probably wouldn't be that great of a game, but back then I thought this was actually a pretty good side-scrolling action game. But other than that, I mean, there was like a dating simulator. I'm sure you guys remember that game Sprung. Probably the most infamous one is that game Ping Pals. I didn't buy any of these because I knew they were garbage. It was sort of like a glorified version of PictoChat, that chat program that was built into the DS. It was a very poor launch lineup. So, moving on, people didn't really start to realize how amazing the DS potentially could be until there were a few games that were released later after the launch. Let's see if I have any of them here. Warioware Touch was released before the end of 2004. And this was a really good indication to people like what the DS could do. I remember it was sort of like a draw. People were waiting for more games for the DS, and this was like one of the first ones to come out where it's like, if I could, I might be wrong here, but I think this was the first DS game that was released outside of the launch game, so this was a big deal. I'm sure those of you that bought a DS at launch, you remember anticipating this game like you could not believe. And it really put both screens to good use, put the touchscreen to good use. Of course, a lot of the mini games were kind of similar because they all involve swiping and stuff like that of some sort with the stylus, but it gave us a good indication of the possibility of the future that the DS had. And then the first game that really came out on the DS that just blew me away, and this was in the earlier half of 2005, it was Yoshi Touch-and-Go. This game truly showed me what the DS could potentially become in terms of games. It was innovative. You were drawing lines on the screen to have Yoshi walk on, and it encompassed both screens. So this was a game that was almost like an arcade game in a way, where the screen was like, it took up both screens. So it was a little weird having like the cutoff between the screens and sort of like having that jarring distance gap between the screens. But once you got used to it, like this was an amazing game. Throwing the eggs, using the stylus to aim. I mean, this was an experience on the DS. This was like one of the first like wow moments that I had with the system. And then of course there were a few other games that came out, you know, in the first 6 months or so of release. Zookeeper. I mean, at this point people were desperate to pick up games, so you were picking up stuff that you normally wouldn't buy, like a puzzle game like Zookeeper, and this was like $40, I think, for a simplistic puzzle game. There was Mr. Driller Drill Spirits, and it's funny, a lot of people remember a lot of the subtitles for DS games actually were sort of acronyms like Drill Spirits, DS. A lot of games did that. Luckily, they don't really do that anymore with the 3DS, thankfully, because that would be really weird. But yeah, just odd times with the DS. A lot of different ways to market your games. This was a really great game. This was another one of those wow moments where it's like, okay, the DS, this is going to be a really good system, because Meteos came out, developed by Q Entertainment, one of my favorite developers for puzzle games. And this was really innovative, playing a puzzle game like this, really fast-paced, using the stylus to like swipe and switch the blocks around, and it was very fast-paced, and it was well-suited to the DS because, once again, it utilized both screens. The bottom screen was where you were doing all the puzzle elements, and then on the top screen you'd see your blocks sort of like fly up and go off into space. It was really cool to play a game like Meteos. So those were some of the earlier games that came out. Then the DS really started to pick up steam in the second half of 2005. Probably my most anticipated game that, you know, when you think of 2005 for DS, you think of games like Castlevania, Kirby, Phoenix Ray, you know, stuff like that. But my most anticipated game, I saw it at E3, it was Lost in Blue. Like, this game looks so innovative, and I fell in love with this game, where you're stranded on an island with this girl, and you have to go around and survive, so you have to use the stylus to cut fruits and cut wood, and, you know, just, you have a certain amount of time every day to make it further and further, and it was really challenging, and you have to, like, take care of one another, and you know, you'd fish with the stylus and like a fishing pole, and it was really innovative. Of course, now it's probably really outdated because it's kind of simplistic stuff to do with the DS touchscreen and everything. But back then, it was like, okay, I see the possibilities of the DS now, and I had a lot of fun with this game. A lot of people didn't like it, but this is one of those games for the DS that sort of like this defined the Nintendo DS for me back then. And then, of course, I have a stack of games here that sort of are the highlights of the 2005 release for the DS. Kirby Canvas Curse. This is another game similar in a way to Yoshi Touch-and-Go, where you use the stylus to sort of like draw lines and have Yoshi walk on it. But this was all about drawing lines to have Kirby sort of make his way through these levels, and it was a very non-typical Kirby game. Very colorful. The graphics were amazing on here, but this was another one of those cases where this was not possible on any other game system at the time. You can only have a game experience like this with the DS. And then, you know, this is another game that really showed what you can do with the DS, and that's Trauma Center Under the Knife. You know, doing surgery on people, cutting them open. It was really different, and another reason where a lot of people were like, okay, alright DS, I see what you're doing. And, let's see. Then there was Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. Didn't really utilize the touchscreen in too many ways besides drawing the symbols to do the spells and stuff like that. But in terms of utilizing a dual screen, having the map on the bottom screen and the gameplay on top, it was pretty innovative, and it was a really fun game. Definitely one of the first like big releases, you know, a new Castlevania game. on the DS. It was a pretty big deal. But probably the biggest deal of all for most people was Mario Kart DS, and this was one of the reasons why the DS was really able to take off and, you know, sell as much as it did. This was a big reason to own a DS, and is one of the reasons why most people bought the system in the first place. Nano Stray was another good shoot-'em-up game that came out in 2005, and of course Phoenix Wright, which I didn't get around to picking up in 2005, but that's just another game that sort of was one of those defining games for the DS for many people. So there you go, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed my look back at the Nintendo DS and the titles that sort of defined it within its launch period in the first year. Share your memories below. What games did you pick up at launch? Did you buy it day one? What games did you enjoy most? Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and happy 10th birthday, Nintendo DS.